Today we're going to work with a very limited color palette, and we're going to work with pen and ink and watercolor. So, and to start with, I have the dip pen here, pen holder and a pen point. I have a little bit of ink that came with it. It's a tiny bit of ink. I have a lot more ink than this, but I'd go ahead and maybe start with just this black ink. I don't know if it's waterproof or not. Let me see. It doesn't say that it is, so I better get some that is also. Just in case I want to try it, I have this. It's called just a water pen. It's you can put water in the handle of this, and you can use it just to soften edges and so forth, just with water. And I have a graphite pencil, just a regular graphite pencil, a rigger brush, which is a very skinny brush. And then I have my regular brushes. Let's see, where did I put those? Hold on a second. I have a really big brush holder with all these different brushes in it. So going to use a toothbrush for spatter. So I have one that has for big spatter, and this one is finer for small spatter. And then I have that stencil brush I mentioned. Whoops, oh dear. This is a stencil brush, cut off on the end. So because I'm working on a somewhat small pad, this is a pad of mixed media paper. It's only 8 by 10. I'm not going to use real big brushes. Usually you use the size of a brush that goes with the size of the paper that you're working with. So I imagine for this I would work with, it's probably a number 6 or 7. Let's see if it's worn off here. Number 8, round brush. And then I have a 10 also. So any questions so far?
Not yet.
Okay, now the colors I'm going to use are ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and I'm going to have some white gouache. If you don't have white gouache, then you can probably get away with using something, right, if you have acrylic like gesso or something like that, you could use that. Let's see. I have a bigger tube of white gouache. It's getting low, but I'll use that too. And I'm going to squeeze them onto a palette that I have. It's like a ceramic tray. I'll start fresh because that way, with a limited palette, it won't be quite as confusing to you. I might add a few other colors too as I go, especially when I go to the next one. But for the first one, because it's going to be mostly grays, I can get by with just 3 colors: burnt sienna, ultramarine, and white. And if you don't have ultramarine, you could use cobalt blue. Oh, it looks like this permanent white is a little bit past its prime. I'll have to look for the other tube. Or dig it out with an X-Acto knife. I could do that too. I have Criscut and I might use that on the next one, but I'm not going to use Criscut on the first one that we're doing.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Yeah, when do you like looking at the paintings we do? What day of the week?
Oh, well, usually I look at it and give comments just on the Monday before we meet, because that way I give other people a chance to comment first.
Okay,
So just try to upload it by Monday if you can.
okay.
Okay?
Sylvia, this is Sue. I have only Chinese white right now. Is that going to work, or what is the difference between the two whites?
Chinese white would be fine. It's a little less opaque, I think, but I think it'll be fine.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, if I can't find, I had another little tube of white gouache out here and suddenly I'm gonna blame my cat. It's missing.
I can't find my gouache either.
So another thing you can use is that bleed proof white. If you have a little, if you're a graphic designer or have that kind of background, you will have a tube of that bleed proof white. Here's another little thing I have. It's a Winsor Newton travel kit. And I was just going to look in it because I think it has a cake of white in there too. Yeah, it does, see? So this is a good backup if I can't find my white. There's some white in here.
Is that watercolor?
It's watercolor. It's Winsor.
Okay.
It's Cotman, which is the student, it's the student quality. It's not
Right.
It's great, but it still works okay. And I think I've got my bleed proof white too. Let me just get some of that if I can see it. Speaking of pens, I have this whole set of Rapidograph pens that I've never used. Somebody gave to me.
Yeah, I've got 2 sets of those.
But I'm hesitant to do it because I tend not to clean them out and then they get clogged.
Yeah, it's hard to rescue them.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm just going to start. So to start off with, the first thing I'm going to do is do a little quick sketch. And you don't absolutely have to do a sketch. One thing I would also recommend if you're working with a little sketchbook or something, you might want to mask off the outside edge with some tape so that when you're finished and you pull off the tape, you're going to have a nice clean margin all the way around your painting. So this is called artist tape. I got it at an art supply store. And I'm just going to put it on the very edge of my paper because I really like the way it looks when I finish a painting and peel it off. And
I
if you,
looked up the masking fluid and how to thin it.
Yes,
and it's made with latex and ammonia. So it says you can thin it with a little water and, or you can thin it with ammonia, which I don't really want to do because I don't like that smell.
yeah. Well, that's helpful information. Thank you.
Yeah, because mine's gotten old and I think it says it only lasts usually 3 years probably. Mine's not that old, I don't think, but maybe 2.
Yeah. Well,
Painter's tape is another good, less tacky tape to use.
which kind of tape?
Painter's tape.
Oh, yeah, that blue tape.
Yeah, it works great.
Okay, good. I
It
have,
comes up easier without ripping the paper.
I also have some called frog tape that you can use on painting walls, but I haven't seen, I don't know if it would rip the paper. It's green like a frog. Okay, so I have this ready. Let's see, I think it's a little warped. I want to straighten it out slightly. All right, so now I'm going to do my sketch, and this is from that first image that I showed you of the 4 trees, and the trees are very evenly spaced. And so for compositional reasons, I might move one of the trees a little closer to the other. I just kind of like something that's not quite as even. So I'm looking at where the horizon line is right now, and it's kind of down here, say around 1/4 of the way down. So I'm going to draw a light line in the background. It kind of shows where that would be. There's another little ridge here where some of the trees are located, like a little drift right here. And then I'm just going to look for the basic shape of the trees. And as I said, it's just going to be very loose so that I have freedom to be a little more spontaneous. Starting with the tree on the left, and now I'm going to do the one on the right. And the ones in the center, I'm going to move this one closer to the one on the right. I'm looking where the main branches are primarily, the bigger branches, so I have that structure. Okay, now, because I'm going to be, let's see, with this one, I think instead of doing my ink first, I'm just going to do the atmospheric painting and get you going first with just the values. So in order to mix, I've got a paper towel. I forgot to mention that, paper towel, so that I can get the water off, excess water off my brush. I have it right down here by my palette. Sometimes I need to take some of the paint off my brush or some of the water. I'm going to start by mixing a little bit of gray. So in order to do that, well, let's see. I think what I'll do first, before I do that with just a wet brush, I'm going to come in and dampen the part above the horizon line. If you have a big flat brush, that probably goes faster than the way I'm doing it, but now I'm going to mix some blue, ultramarine blue with some burnt sienna. What's happening is that it's giving me, when I have more brown in it, it's going to give me a color that's very warm gray. And if I have more blue in it, it'll give me a cooler kind of a gray. So in order to really see what color it is, I'm going to get an extra little scrap of paper here, something that I can just paint on the back of. So that I can test it. And it's not absolutely necessary, but what I did in the botanical class on Thursday. I'm just going to use this to see what color my gray is. So if I paint that, I can see that it's fairly cool on this side, but warmer here. So that means that I haven't mixed the color very well on my brush. So I'm going to mix that a little bit more. And if I add more water, because I want to start with a very light tone, I get a lighter gray. You see? So that's what I'll start with. So now I'm going to come down here where I painted my line. And I'm going to tilt my paper so that the water is actually going to run down the other way. Because mainly the color that I'm seeing on this image is going from a little bit darker by the horizon to almost white further up in the sky. And in the center, there's hardly any color. So I'm taking just a damp brush and lifting some of the color from that center area. Any questions so far?
I have an unrelated question. I just got some bleed proof white,
Uh-huh.
which I've never had before. It's really thick. I'm surprised how thick it is.
Yeah, that's because you can always thin it out, but you can't make it thicker. So they want you to have the ability to cover ink or whatever you want to cover it with. So in order to thin
So-
it out, you have to add water.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask. So you thin it with water. Okay.
So I'm looking at my photo and I see there's a little more of a darker tone on this side. So I'm just dropping a little bit more color into that area while it's still damp. And if I want to, I can actually make a shape, even though maybe on my reference photo, it looks really soft. I could give it a little bit more of a shape if I wanted to. Okay, so now while I'm waiting for that to dry a little bit, I'm going to also come back in with some of this and now paint this little snowdrift that I see in the foreground. And I'm softening one edge of it. There's a little bit of tone under this tree over here too. It's very subtle. So remember too, when watercolor dries, it's going to dry a little bit lighter than it is when it's wet. So it might be a little too damp yet for me to do very much detail. I'm going to check and see. No, this feels pretty dry up in here. So at this point, well, I can start to use my dip pen, but I'm going to use my paint or my paint instead of ink right now. I'm going to put some of that in my pen. And see, with a dip pen, it has a little hole in the center. So hopefully some of that paint will go into the little hole. And I can start to draw some of this tree that I see. See if it's going to be too wet. Now I can start to draw some of the branches for this little tree that's kind of light in color behind some of the others. And where it's damp, it's going to bleed out a little bit, but that's okay. It's a thin line. I want it to be sort of a gray tone, not black. Oops, I just got my hand in my paint over here on this side. I have to try to keep my hand off of my painting.
Glad I'm not the only one that does that.
It's hard to remember, you get involved.
Yeah.
And I see that this other tree over here, it's very soft up in the top part of the tree because it's kind of foggy. So I'm going to go ahead and do some of the drawing of that tree now also. So I get the basic structure. Once I get the really fine lines and the structure in, I can come back in with a brush and do some of the thicker lines. I don't have to be really super precise about the shape of the tree or the branches. I just need to get the general feeling of it. Okay, I think I'll come back in with some of the brush, do some of it with the brush now, just because I want to define some of the trunks and try to get that shape in there.
Is your background dry?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, not the part by the horizon line. It's still a little wet. So
Okay.
it's bleeding a little bit, but not too bad. This paper is a little smoother than my Arches paper. So I'm noticing it. It might not be holding the moisture quite as long.
Did you pre-soak it?
No, this is on a block. Well, not
Oh,
really
okay.
a block, it's mixed media, so it's each one is an individual cardboard with a paper surface on top.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to switch to my rigger. My rigger is this thin, skinny brush. And I'm going to mix a little bit more paint because I'm running out. Didn't mix a big puddle. Not big enough anyway. Okay, so here's my testing thing. Okay, so that's fairly dark, but I think that's okay. I'm going to have a varied, some darker areas. So I'm trying to keep the values lighter in the areas that are farther away. And I got a little dark with this one, so I'm going to take a tissue and blot it. So I'm lifting a little bit of that before it gets soaked in. Working kind of back and forth, I'm going to darken this one in the foreground. Because remember, everything's kind of related. If you darken something else, it's going to make the other ones look lighter. And to paint lines, I'm just going to drag my brush. There's so many little fine lines here. This is what can be a challenge, how do we do this? How do we make it so that it won't take forever, but still get the impression that we want? So, I mean, one way might be to do some little dots and, start to broken lines, for instance, or get the feeling there could be some leaves still left on the trees. Another thing that I hadn't really thought about, but we could do would be to take a sponge to create that texture. Here's my bleed proof white I just found. Anybody else have any ideas for how to create all those little fine lines?
You could try deli paper.
Oh, you mean where you just put that on top of a wet surface?
You just crinkle it up and dip it in a real light wash and blot it onto your painting.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any deli paper, but I have parchment paper.
But the lines are pretty haphazard, so that might not be what you want. I don't know.
Yeah, you want like a radiating effect.
Might be able to crinkle it in that radiating pattern. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we're going to learn from one another. If people want to try those things, that'll be great.
I wonder if wax paper would work too.
It could be. I don't have wax paper either. I used to, no more though. So I'm trying to just kind of put in some light lines, but breaking it up. Oops, I got a little bit thick with that one. I have an echo. If you do something you don't like, you can wet it and then blot it up like that. So I think because it'll take time to do all of this, what I'll do now is just kind of show you the process more than the final details. So you want to keep putting in the branches until you get the value that you think is appropriate. And then you take a look and you will look to see if you need to make some things darker. So when I look at this, I see that I need to get a little bit darker with some of my branches here in the foreground tree because it stands out more. So and then I need to put a little more water in my paint, come back in on this tree on the left because it's a little darker than I have it, but not as dark as the other tree further back. I'm looking at what you're seeing on the video and it looks pretty dark there, but not on my paper. Now I need to start also to look at where the tree meets the surface of the snow. So need to pay attention to the shape of it down here at the bottom. So it looks like it's actually sitting in the snow. Oops, I got something here. And because there is a little bit of tone, I don't know if it's a shadow or what, I'm going to come back in now and drag some of the color at the bottom of the trunk out slightly. Now I want to overlap some of the lighter branches with darker branches on the tree here on the right. So I want to come back in now and overlap some of the ones from behind it. Come in and get a little darker on this tree.
What number is your rigger brush?
I see a 0, but it looks like something might be wiped or worn off.
Okay.
I've had my brushes for quite a long time, and I think, they the handles start to lose some of their details.
Yeah, they wear off.
Uh-huh. So I could keep going with this, and I should keep going with it, because you could see that it still doesn't feel like it's finished. And I just want to look now and see if there are places where I want to get a little darker. Like I think I want to come back in and get a little darker on this side in the background, just slightly. So I'm doing just a little glaze of a little bit darker there. And I might come in, because in some places back here, it sort of looks like there is more shading behind the trees, the clumps of branches and so forth. That might help to give it a little more volume.
Also has a diffuse effect, so it's kind of pushing those farther trees back spatially.
Yeah, it helps to put them more into the background, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because what you want is more contrast close to you and less farther away. Even though I don't really see this in my reference photo, I want to bring a little bit more of some values up here into the foreground.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
Kind of anchors it.
And then a little bit of a diagonal is also kind of helpful. It kind of makes it have a little more form. So for those of you who love detail, you can go back in and put more of these branches. And I'm anxious to see what you do. I think that'll be really neat if you feel like you want to do that.
I like watching other people do detail.
Hey, I like that too. After being the one that did it for so long, huh, Tim?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you solicited comments about a possible other approach if you didn't want to have to get involved with all that detail. And one thought I had was maybe just coming in at the start instead of starting with lines, start in with a tone, an overall generalized tone for the upper portions of the trees. But that probably didn't work for purposes of your demo, but where you had more time to let it dry, then you could come back on top of that general tone with your line work.
I mean, here's an idea too. Let me just try this now because it's sort of an experiment. If I come back in now with some tone up here in the parts where I see it in my photo, and then I come back on top of that with some white gouache or bleed proof white, with some just little lines or little dots,
Mm-hmm.
that might do it. Because it is feeling to me like it needs to have more values. Even though I want it to be separated from the trees in the distance, I still want to have more tone. So now what I'm going to do, maybe even get a little blue in there in places.
Sylvia, my internet went out for a while. I just want to make sure, are you using only the colors of burnt sienna and ultramarine?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now I know it's still wet, but I want to see if I can do this. Boy, I haven't opened my bleed proof white for a long time. And this is something you can reconstitute with water. And then my thought was that I can come back in now with some of this and try to define, sharpen up some of the lines.
Mhm.
Sort of like the negative space painting.
Sylvia, having us visit you in your studio and you haven't used your supplies for a while is reminiscent of when we invite people to dinner and we haven't washed the wine glasses since the last party.
These days, I mean, don't forget when you do that, you're going to have a lot of washing.
Great. Great analogy, Penny.
Do you sometimes wonder if this is ever going to end? Like, is it ever going to go back to normal?
Yeah.
Yeah, a different normal.
Yeah. Okay, well, this was fun. I mean, it's not completely successful, but you get the idea of building up darker values to create that illusion of depth. And, keep working on it.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Yeah, is it okay to do like abstract painting sketches instead of the realistic thing?
Of course, yeah. I have my brother, he visited me a couple of years ago, And we went out in the landscape painting and he just wanted to do abstractions. So he would look at shapes. He would decide that he wanted to do something that would be like he'd see something in the landscape. Like that looks like a tiger to me, he would say. And so he would just do things that would be sort of
Yeah.
very abstract looking.
Because
And
I'm my real thing is printmaking, and I do lino cuts, so
Mhm.
it's kind of different.
Yeah. Oh, now before we stop, I'm going to use this little bottle of ink I have and just see what happens if I use my ink pen, just so you can see. Okay, so see when I do this with the ink, it gets a lot darker
Yeah.
and a lot more well defined. So I think that's actually what this needs, and it goes faster too. So this will be your last step, is to come back in with a little bit of ink on the trees that are closer to you.
Sylvia, I've never used a pen and ink like that. How do you have to clean your tools afterwards in a certain way?
Well, I always just wipe it off, but yeah.
That's all it needs.
Uh-huh. I think so. It depends. If you're using a rapidograph, you've got to really clean it out, but different types of pens, it depends. You know, a lot of people use those permanent markers. Oh, I just got hit a wet spot. So that's okay. It's probably a bird nest in the tree, right?
Yeah.
An apple.
Yeah, an old apple, old dried apple.
Or persimmon.
Yeah, or like me, I've got all these old dried pomegranates. All right. Well, you know me, I get started and it's hard to stop, but I do have to because I have to start the other one.
Yeah, well, you're trying to do a lot within a finite amount of time. So,
That's a challenge.
Does this class go till
Yeah.
12:30?
Yeah, let's see. No, I think goes to 1 o'clock, doesn't it?
Yes.
And you did well. And for us beginners, you really showed us a lot. Thank you so much.
Oh, and I was going to go to VoiceThread too. So what will I do? I wanted to do another painting, but I also want to do VoiceThread. Should I do VoiceThread now and then maybe do the other painting another time?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sophia, this is Mantrita. It does go to 12:30 on the schedule.
Which one?
It's
It only
shorter.
goes to 12:30.
Oh, for goodness sake. Okay, I guess it is. We started at 9. Okay, it's 3.5 hours. I guess I'll have to do the VoiceThread. So sorry, I'm always promising more than I can deliver.
Better than
think
the
I
other way
heard-
around.
I heard
Well,
that.
I think by leaving some of the how-to questions to the end, it's probably a better idea than taking them at the beginning.
Well, I don't know about that because sometimes if people are working at the same time, they might.
No, I meant the questions of technology.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Technological question. Yeah. Wait until the end. Good idea. All right. So I was going to peel off the paint or the tape, but it's not quite dry, so I should wait. Let me go ahead and stop this now. And stop the recording.